Welcome to SpeakuP Monday. Today, I am back in the host seat, Bhavna Parihar, and so excited to be back. Thank you, Brother Rob. We're coming to you live from tropical nomad Canggu in beautiful Bali, Indonesia. Now, I know for a fact there are some newbies in this audience, so for those who are joining us for the first time in person and live, SpeakuP Monday is all about motivation and inspiration. We believe that people inspire people, and that the more conversations we can have on this stage, the more perspective we gain and the more compassionate we as humanity can become. This is episode 413. Big claps. And none of that would be possible without our brother Rob here, who is the founder and host of SpeakuP Monday. 4 years in, every Monday, rain or shine, he is bringing people together to share, inspire, challenge, and create dialogue. So thank you for this platform and for allowing us all to be here today. Now, my next guest is no stranger to speaking. He has graced countless stages, podcasts, platforms, and a TED Talk on self-love, has spoken to companies, Fortune 500 companies from all around the world. His story of transformation from poverty to being a global leader has spanned decades. It spanned the depths of the low to the highest of triumphs, and again and again and again. It's all about harnessing potential. But how can we harness potential if we don't believe in ourselves? And if we don't believe in ourselves, how do we recognize that we can believe in ourselves, what that looks like, and is self-love the answer? And if self-love is the answer, then what are the questions? So with that, we're going to dive into so many topics, and as this is a dialogue, we may end up on tangents that we don't know about, and that is exactly why SpeakuP Monday is the platform to watch. So with that, please welcome my guest, Branden Collinsworth. Now, I do want to shout out, I think, unless you're going to do it, but us being here on this stage is very serendipitous. Funnily enough, I was following Branden on Instagram for 2 years and I didn't know it because I kind of just followed. I liked to post a quote one day, thought it inspired me, and then kind of got lost in the weeds of that. And then 2 years later, we meet through a fellow SpeakuP Monday alumni guest, Asma Usman, who introduced us. And for that, we are here today sharing a conversation that I am so, so grateful to be able to be a part of, because I know even if it impacts just one of you in the audience, then our mission is complete. So shout out to Asma, woo-hoo, from Toronto.
Shout out to Asma, 100%. And it's such an honor to be here. Thank you, each and every one of you. I am because we are Ubuntu, and excited to dive in today into everything and all things human potential.
And I will say this before we start our dialogue, is that at some point in this talk, we are going to have a Q&A. And I think one of the beautiful things about having a live studio audience is it allows us to engage. And it gives an all-access pass to someone like Branden. So whether you want to know the gems, the codes, the takeaways, the tangible ways in which he has risen and continues to rise despite setbacks, this is the time to do it. So just have those questions ready. They might percolate while we're talking, and just know that this is your opportunity. So with that, let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so I think to frame this a little bit, a show of hands, how many people here in the audience have either seen or heard or listened to some of Branden's work, whether it's on social media or any of his talks? And if you haven't, that's okay too. Okay. So about 6 here. So that actually makes for an incredible audience because we are reaching some who haven't been reached before. So to kind of lay that foundation a little bit is, if anyone saw the title of this talk, there were a lot of big words in it. We talked about harnessing your individual potential. We talked about transformative triumphs. We talked about him being a fitness entrepreneur who was homeless, to then being a performance coach for Nike, to being a founder of retreats, and his journey of resilience and growth is a testament to who he is. But none of this would be possible if he didn't believe in himself. And that is an ongoing journey that he is on, that he allows other leaders to also tap into. So to kind of take us back to when maybe that seemed bleak, I'm going to put a guess, being homeless would be one. If you could take us back to your childhood. And frame for some here, we have a lot of expats in the audience as well who may not resonate or understand the term, the projects, as it is, I think, largely a North American term.
Of course. All right, well, first and foremost, such an honor to be here. And me and B were talking earlier about the power of just sharing our stories vulnerably and truthfully. And the truth is, if one of you are touched today, we've done our job. And so thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for existing, and just know that the world is a better place because you exist. My journey has been a 40-year journey. There's a quote that I love. It's by Andrew Bennett, and he says, "The longest journey you'll ever go on is the 18 inches from the head to the heart." And so for 40 years, I've been on this journey from my head to my heart, which all started in Las Vegas, Nevada. How many of y'all been to Las Vegas? All right. What I love about Las Vegas is there's not one place in the world I go when somebody hears that I'm from Las Vegas that they don't have like a visceral reaction. It's never just like neutral. It's always like, oh, or nah, or But Vegas is one of those places that every vice, every shadow, everything you can get into can be exploited. And a lot of people, they just know the strip. They know Vegas from the shining lights. They know Vegas from the casinos. They know Vegas from the shows, but they don't know that Vegas also has one of the highest poverty rates in the entire world, one of the highest incarceration rates, one of the highest high school dropout rates, one of the lowest educational systems. And that's where I grew up, east side of Vegas in the projects. And when we talk about projects in Vegas, usually means government mandated homes, Section 8 housing, places where a lot of people are fighting and scratching to get by, where just breaking even is considered a success. Like if you just don't go to jail, you are considered a success. And so from the time I was a child, I was put up against pretty insurmountable obstacles. When a lot of my kids were focused on going on field trips and doing what kids were doing, I was focused on surviving. It was me, my mom, and my little sister. And my mother, at a very young age, 7 years old, needed me to step up and start to be the man of the house. And my initiation to really becoming the man of the house was one morning, my mother woke me up and she said, "Brandon, I need you." We went downstairs of the apartment, unlocked our bikes from the apartment rails. She put my little sister in the bike seat, and about 5:30 a.m. in the morning, we rode to the back of one of the supermarkets, and we waited. And it was cold, and I remember I was visibly disturbed. I didn't want to be there. And all of a sudden, the back door opened up, and they began to throw day-old food into the trash can. And my mom said she needed me to go get the food out of the trash can. And so that became a regular occurrence where we would go to these stores because we didn't have enough food, we didn't have enough money, and we would go get our day-old food out of the trash can. And that's how we survived. And so 7 years old is when it really started. And slowly but surely, the streets took my innocence and it made me into something that was hard, weaponized, brought my lion's roar, taught me how to move, taught me how to see, taught me to harness my intuition, but at the same time also put me in a downward spiral of some destructive habits. And so no matter what I was going against, and no matter how hard I tried to make it out, 16 years old, the projects began to take its toll. And so I dropped out of high school. My mother had a mental breakdown. She ended up giving me away, meaning giving up her parental custody of me. And for 2 years, I was homeless on the streets, in fights, drinking, and watching several of my homies either end up in jail or end up dead. And actually, one of my closest friends, one of the guys who did make it out, he is actually in jail right now facing a life sentence. This was the only other dude who made it out with me. And so at this juncture, I'm the only person from my childhood that made it to where I am. And that's why I take this very seriously. And that's why I take the opportunity to do what I do with as much conviction and much potency as possible, because I know that being here is a blessing, and I know that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. So many people had to lay it down for me to be right here. So 2 years on the streets, I'm headed nowhere. All my teachers that once were trying to rehabilitate me told me I was a waste of talent. And so I found my solace in alcohol. I found my solace in drugs. I found my solace in street life. I found my solace in making money. And when I was 18 years old, I had an aha moment. I was sitting at the bus stop on the east side of Vegas in front of a hotel called Sam's Town. And probably nobody knows Sam's Town, but if you do, like, bonus points. But Sam's Town is just this ghetto hotel in the east side of Vegas. And I was sitting at a bus stop, and there was another guy sitting next to me who was like 25 years older than me. And he was on something, probably some meth or something like that, but he looked like me. And I remember I looked at him and I said, if I don't change, I don't shift, that's going to become me. That's going to be me. And at that moment, I did not know how I was going to get out of the projects. I had no parents to show me the way. I had no mentors at that time. I had no schooling or education. But something came through that day, and it was this invitation to become a voracious reader, to begin to educate myself. And so I got on the bus that day, and that was really a metaphor for me stepping into the journey to where I am now today. And it took 10 years of me hustling in the projects just to break even. When I went to school, finally, it took me 4 years of no courses counting because I was so remedial with my English and my math and all of that. But I stayed with it, and one book turned to 10 books, 10 books turned to 100 books, 100 books turned to 1,000 books. And then all of a sudden, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Mentors started seeing that I was really focused on becoming the best I could be. And little by little by little, everything began to change. It took 20 years of hustling, of focus, of making right decisions again and again and again to get to that 1 year where my life was changed. And that's why when people meet me, there's an intensity to me, there's a conviction to me. It's because I know what I'm standing on. I know how blessed I am. And I know that even in the projects that I grew up in, there were people who wanted it. There are people that wanted to get out, but circumstances didn't happen. So the fact that I've been able to not only get out, but to fly, to rehabilitate myself, to heal my addictions, to be able to sit in rooms like this with amazing people and talk about the power of human potential, something I take very seriously, and it truly is an honor. So that's just a little backstory.
Little. Depends how you define that. I think significant, powerful, bittersweet, and scary. And so I want to just go back for a second. If you had to distill it down to 3 words that would maybe encapsulate those kind of 3 turning points from that moment of when it was you not going to jail or you coming out of jail versus your friend who ended up in, to, as you said, having the opportunity to become a voracious reader, to then at that after the 10-year mark where you start stepping more into education. If there are 3 words, maybe 5 if we can't find 3, that you want to just leave the audience with to kind of understand when you were at those tipping points, what that felt like and what those words might be.
I'm going to start with a quote.
Yep, perfect.
Emerson has a quote. He says, "There's nothing capricious in nature. The implanting of a desire means that its gratification is in the constitution of the creature that feels it." And what that means is that these dreams that we're given, these ahas, these wisps of inspiration, or Stephen Pressfield in The War of Art would say the diamonds, these things aren't there to tease us. A lot of times our society tells us those dreams are unreal, those dreams are unrealistic. You know, that's just you thinking too far outside of the box. The one thing I did is I was delusionally optimistic and delusionally trusted the dreams that I was given. And the more I trusted them, the more I realized that they were meant to come to life. And so the first thing is trust. Second thing is gratitude. Rest in peace. My mom passed away a year and a half ago. And one of the things she did teach me was no matter how bad it was, when we didn't have any food, when we didn't have electricity, when we didn't have like hot water in the wintertime, my mom taught me that no matter how bad it got, there was always something to be grateful for. And when you can find gratitude in the challenges, it's like the universe is like, they passed the test. Gratitude is the access point to abundance. Trust, gratitude, first 2, and then I would say the last one is focus. You know, oftentimes in the spiritual world, people want to just sit back, manifest the BMW like they did in The Secret, and things are going to change. But one of the books that changed my life was the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, A Narrative of a Slave. And in his book, he said that he prayed for his freedom for 20 years, but nothing changed until he started praying with his legs. A lot of times, we got to meet God halfway. And praying with our legs is that. And so gratitude, trust, and focus or action, tapas, we call it in yoga, fire, that's the formula that turns those God winks into tangible realities.
Okay, so now with trust, focus, and gratitude, how then did you make the leap to, from what I understand, you got a master's in performance psychology, you had to fund your way through school. How did you make that leap?
Yeah, so one of the ways I figured out how to cope with a lot of my trauma in the projects was through the somatic body, through physical fitness. I had a third grade teacher named Ms. Bennett, and she had a program called JAWS, Jog and Walk Stars. And so she gave us the option to either do recess, this was in third grade, I was 9 years old, to do recess, or you could run laps. And if you ran enough laps, 100 miles to be exact in a semester, you got a pizza party. You tell a kid you get a pizza party, that's a big deal. And so I ran 100 miles over the course of a semester, me and one other kid. But she told me I would come up against this invisible thing called the burn. And she said, you're going to get out there and you're going to run. And all of a sudden, this burn is going to appear. This thing called the wall. This thing that is going to tell you to stop. But if you can focus and push through, there's gifts on the other side of it. And in third grade, that blew my mind. It was also the time I was super into X-Men. And so everything I was trying to do was to be a superhero. I'm like, how do I unlock everything that I am? What happened is every time I started having bouts of depression or anxiety, I would go out and run, and I would notice I would come up against the wall, I would come up against the burn, and the next thing you know, I would pass through it, and all of a sudden I would feel a little bit better. So when I finally started on my journey, I wanted to share people this miraculous thing I learned from moving the physical body. I fell in love with it. The human body became this vehicle for awakening. And that's really what allowed me to start to push my way through community college for 4 years, through undergrad, and then eventually going to grad school. It was through my love of the physical body and me sharing that love and teaching people to also fall in love with what it is they are physically that inevitably opened the doors to one of my most potent mentors, Dr. Michael Norwood, who was a sports psychologist at the University of Kansas, where he started telling me and teaching me more about the mind-body connection. And so from the body, it inevitably led to the mind. Now, coming from the community college where I had like a 2.0 GPA, which I thought was incredible, and getting to University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where I had like a 3.1, when I started looking for a program to dive into the power of the mind, I just was looking like, okay, let me see what's out there. And I found this performance and positive psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania. Now, I'm on the West Coast. I'm from the projects. I don't know anything about Ivy Leagues. I don't know anything about distinguished schools or anything like that. All I know is that that program resonated with me. And so I started to prepare to go for it. And I remember a lot of my friends were like, bro, you know that's Ivy League, right? You know you like barely made it out of undergrad. And I said, you know what? Like, I want that. I feel that. And so I spent 2 years on one application, sitting in Starbucks, focusing every day on every word. I didn't apply to any other schools. 2 years on one application, sent my application into the University of Pennsylvania. It took about 4 months for them to get back to me. I found out that I was the 44th out of the 44th spot, the last spot that got chosen. Not only that, it was like between me and one other person. And I got finally the email that I got the spot to become a grad student at the University of Pennsylvania and go to the Ivy Leagues. And that was an incredible validation for me that nothing is impossible. And so I ended up going to the University of Pennsylvania, studying under some of the most prominent psychologists in the world. And it absolutely kicked my butt in so many ways. In fact, I got to this program, and I remember, and I have a little bit of beef with the University of Pennsylvania. They know it, because the dean came up to me. I was trying my hardest, but you got to understand, coming from UNLV to go into the Ivy Leagues, it's a different thought process. These students are cultivated from the time they're kids to think a certain way. The dean of the school came to me and said, you got all the willpower in the world, but you don't got the way power. Basically saying that I'm stupid. And so being the innovator and the hustler that I am, I remembered when they sent the email to me that I got in, they included all of the deans and all of the people in the entire school. And so I wrote a letter and I included them all. And I said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll spend its whole life thinking it's stupid. And sent that out. And they realized that I wasn't one to be just pushed aside. And inevitably graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, which opened up the doors for me to open up my chain of gyms in Vegas, which was one of the first gyms at that time to focus on not only the physical body, but the mental body as well.
And so, thank you. So you mentioned at one point the word cultivation, or cultivated, because you were saying how these Ivy League kids coming from privilege, coming from money, were cultivated and brought up. And now there is you who's being told you're not built the same way, you're not shaped the same way, you're not polished in the same way. Yet you got to where you are and you started your gym. So can you give some insight into what is your process of cultivating for yourself, like what that looks like for you and what that looked like during that time to shape who you were, to allow yourself to be in the big leagues and to operate from that place?
Great question. You know, I am obsessed with studying the greats. And if anybody follows me on Instagram, that's all I do is post the greats, Kobe's and Muhammad Ali's and Maya Angelou's and anybody who's truly harnessed their gifts in a powerful way. And there's something that is consistent amongst them all different individuals with different superpowers, but there's a few things that are very similar. There's a relentless belief in oneself. There's a relentless work ethic. There's an element of service. It's not for just them. It's for something bigger than them, which inevitably pulls some kind of power into a person to unlock even on a higher level. And so when it comes to like my own process, I look to the past. I look to the ancestors that laid it down. I look to the fact, I just look around. I mean, if we look in this room, everything that is in here was once a neural impulse in somebody's mind, brought into tangible reality. And so leaning into the past, studying the greats has been one of the mechanisms to really help me cultivate my resolve and my belief and my ability to do what I've done. The other thing is constantly putting on the white belt. And there's a term in Zen Buddhism called Shoshin. Shoshin means beginner's mind. And one of my master martial arts teachers, Muay Thai teachers, Coach John, big love if you're watching, he always talks about this fact that when you do get the black belt, the most powerful thing to do is take it back off and put the white belt right back on. Always being in a space of being a voracious student, always learning time and time again, always knowing that you don't have all the answers. And the moment you think you have the answers, it's time to become a student again. And in that process of doing that over and over and over again, I'm never too egotistical to step into a room and humble myself and to learn. And in that process, it's almost like the universe, God is like, okay, yes, I see that he's not going to let this success get to his head. He's going to stay in his heart. And therefore, I'm going to bless him with more opportunities to walk this path. And not saying that I always had that. I have failed so many times, it is not even funny, y'all. I have gone broke so many times, it's not even funny. I have messed up so many times, it's not even funny. But again, that's the beauty of being a white belt. If you look at life as being a white belt, for example, anybody who's a white belt, you go to a jiu-jitsu gym and you go up against a black belt, you're gonna get owned. It just happens. You're messy, you're sloppy, you're not efficient, but eventually you get better. And that's the process. That's the beauty of the process of being a perpetual student, is over time you get stronger. And so for me, it's again and again and again stepping into the dojo of life, testing it out, and getting really comfortable with failing often. In fact, I often speak about it as you get to earn the failures. How many people speak about like earning the failure? It takes a lot to actually get to failure. So when you fail, instead of saying, damn, I failed, it's more about saying, good job. Now let me learn what I need to learn and evolve and get better.
And to add to that, I would say the word failure carries such a stigma or a narrative because of how we've associated, how we've been conditioned to view it, versus it can be like, let's toast to failure. I did something and maybe it didn't work out, but I don't need my past to be a place of residence. It can be a place of reference, right? And I can
Powerful.
break and grow from that. So because amongst all your incredible failures, something pretty big happened. You built a line of gyms, and then, you know, someone that we all might know a little bit, Nike, came calling. So tell us about that moment.
Yeah, so 2008, I watched The Secret for my first time. I'm sure everybody here has seen it. It's like the beginner's spiritual book for most people. So I put Nike on my vision board. And then I started praying with my legs, and I started reaching out to them, and I sent them probably 200 emails over the course of 5 years and didn't get any responses. At that time, continued to cultivate my craft, continued to focus on my skill set. And in 2014, there was a couple representatives from Nike in Las Vegas, and they were asking around at a convention who was doing innovative stuff in the fitness space. Next thing you know, Nike shows up to my gym, and we have a conversation. And a few months later, I became one of the only trainers out of Las Vegas ever, the only trainer out of Vegas signed to Nike as an athlete and as a trainer. And what a lot of people don't realize is it's been 10 years, I've had to survive 10 contractual re-signs. So every year, they clean slate and they bring people back into the space. And the only thing I can say is why I'm still in the space is because I've never made Nike my main thing. I've stayed true to myself. I've stayed true to my authenticity. And for some reason, that continues to resonate. And Nike has seen that. And they've given me the opportunity to truly cultivate my gifts in the most powerful way. One of the reasons why I was able to walk away from my gyms and go to Bali is because Nike opened up the doors for me to study yoga and bring it back into the world of sports, bring it back into the space of athleticism, which was something that was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. So Nike, I mean, shout out to them. I mean, everybody has their opinions, but like so many soulful people at Nike that have been a huge part of my growth.
And I would say that, you know, just from a pure level of awareness, as you said, whether you like it or hate it, they're a powerful brand with powerful messaging that you can choose how you resonate with it, but one can't deny the power it has. So when you were working with such a powerful brand and working with elite athletes, can you give some examples of the way in which you are coaching them, what the mindset work looked like? Because these are people that are already at the top of their game. And so when someone is at their top of the game, how do they tap into their potential to further themselves, to break through, is one question. And second is, when they're already there, how do you instill in them that they can do more?
Great questions. So I'm still signed to Nike. This is the 11th year. So 11 years, just got re-signed again, which is incredible. And they're actually funding my PhD in neuroscience, and we're going to be doing some deep research into the mind. Nike's finally into the mind space where mental health is something that's being talked about. I think my alarm's going off.
All the beauty of life, guys. Just the beauty of life.
Yeah, so question one more time.
About how you're able to break through for the athletes that you work with.
Yes, absolutely. The one thing that's important to remember is like, you would think they're a lot different than everybody else, and they're not. And that's one thing that happens a lot of times is people put people on pedestals. You see these high performers that are, quote unquote, glorified for what they've accomplished, and we think that they are them and they are not us. But the truth is, when you pull back the layers, they're really going through the same stuff that we all are going through. I'm going through the same stuff you all are going through. I have my moments of depression. I have my moments of anxiety. I have that. The one thing that really separates world class from everybody else is consistency. Showing up day in and day out, showing up with intention, and surrounding yourself again and again with a world-class team. A lot of people think that the lone wolf mentality is like noble and like people could just do it on their own. And the truth is you need to have an incredible team of individuals supporting you. And so world-class people have world-class teams. That's one of the most important things. People who are going to check you when you're falling off. People who are going to see you for your greatness. People who are going to take your success personally. And that's one of those things that like you can really, it's really a beautiful thought experiment is like how many people in your circles take your success personally? Like they get offended if you're falling off and not leading up to your potential. And if you're committed to world class, you're going to want to surround yourself with people like that. And so from a world class standpoint, that's one of the things that I've noticed. And then one of the ways that I've cultivated and really helped people push into that space is to really understand that time is limited. And what you plant now, what you cultivate now matters. And there's all in. It's easy to get to all in. As a trainer, I can get everybody to the burn. I can get everybody here to the burn. You know, those 30 pull-ups today, there was a burn. But 31 on the pull-ups, or that little extra, that's not anything that somebody outside of you can do. That's something that you have to do in your inner world. So everybody can be all in, but are you all in on all in? And the all in on all in, that 1% shift, you know, they say that at 211 degrees, water is boiling. At 212, it turns into steam. That one extra degree ends up being a light year trajectory jump over time. Kobe Bryant, Mamba mentality, waking up at 4 a.m., getting his extra practice in every day might not have been that much in for a couple months or like one summer, but you take 10 years of that compounded, it changes everything. And so the one thing we've all been gifted here is time. We all have the same amount of time. I just read this incredible book called 10X is Easier Than 2X, and it talked about two types of time. First time is Chronos. Chronos is quantitative, very linear, very like 1 hour to 2 hour Newtonian time. Then you have Kairos, that's deep time, rooted in intention and rooted in meaning. And when we are intentional with our time, what is able to open in our time really becomes magical. And that's what I see in world-class individuals is they take their time very, very seriously. They make sure that it's infused with intention, and when it's infused in intention, it becomes a game changer.
So when you talk about time and world-class leaders, because at some point you already were, but from what I understand, you really stepped into it, was into service. Mm-hmm. And so can you share a little bit about, because I know there was some pretty significant moments, yeah. Meeting of your father, yeah. the death of your mom, permission to go dark and deep, I think I have, we've talked about this, and how you felt, how that shaped you, and how that made its way into what you're doing now with leadership, warrior retreats, and just give a little bit of color to the audience what that time looked like.
Maya Angelou, one of the greats, says, people are going to forget what you did, people are going to forget what you said, but people are never going to forget how you made them feel. Muhammad Ali says, service to others is the rent we pay for our time here on earth. And as I achieved a certain sense of success in Vegas and all of a sudden signed to Nike and had 200 plus pairs of Nikes in my living room when I couldn't even afford Nikes when I was a kid, I still felt this sense of emptiness. I thought I did it all right. Went after the money, went after the success, and I felt empty. And so about 6 years prior to that, I finally met my father. And my father long story short, I was in my senior year of UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and I was in an African-American film class. And the professor was doing a documentary of the black Confederate soldiers that fought against the North. And he was doing it at a local high school called Valley High School. And for some reason, I was like, I think my mom and my dad went to the Valley High School. From what I know, my mom talked about my dad, and he looks at me and he said, "Is your dad named Lane Rolling?" And I said, "Yeah, that's my dad." He said, "That's my brother's best friend." So that night, my dad called me for my first time. Come to find out, my dad is an infectious disease trauma surgeon, black man who walked away from everything in the States and moved to the Amazon jungle of Peru. And so at that time, I was deep in my forgiveness work. I was deep in really just harnessing everything that I am. I was deep in that space of committing to being the best person I could be. And we started to cultivate a relationship. And in 2012, after I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, this is when all the gyms were starting to come online. I went down to Peru and worked with him in the jungles. And he took me into the clinics, and I saw babies deformed, babies burnt, legs amputated. And he showed me what it really meant to be a humanitarian. He showed me that a lot of these influencers and people you think are really about it are actually shallow as can be. And that when it comes to real humanitarian work, it's anonymous to anonymous, as Jay-Z would say. And so he took me into that space, and it checked me. It checked my entitlement. It checked my my ego. It showed me that I had a lot of room to grow. And so for the next 9 years, I started spending 2 months a year in Peru working with my father, really learning what it meant to be a true humanitarian. Oftentimes, you can't even speak the same language as the people, but through the heart-to-heart connection, all of a sudden, you are speaking the same language. Love is a language. And over the course of time, as I have started to expand my platform, I realized that a lot of the leaders that I know are actually empty in their leadership because they're not doing it for the right thing. They're doing it for the wrong thing. They're not doing it from the heart. And so what I did is I brought, in 2016, I just invited a couple friends to come to Peru. I wanted to show them what we were doing down there. 20 people ended up coming down. The next thing you know, I realized wow, a lot of people in the spiritual spaces talk about ayahuasca. I like to talk about life-awaska, because when you see a baby in the hospital and it's taking its last breath, that'll change you forever if you're if there's any humanity in you. And so I bring these leaders down, and all of a sudden I see that, wow, this is everything that they needed to bring back into their spaces. And that was the birth of Warrior Retreats. That kind of came at the same time where I walked away from all of my gyms in Vegas, went on this pilgrimage of studying around the world. And again, as I said earlier, Nike gave me the opportunity to help fund some of that and study with different masters in different spaces. 2020, though, the universe had a different plan for me. And at my quote unquote thought I was riding off into the sunset, walked away from my gyms, collecting residuals, doing my stuff in Peru, signed to Nike, all my money dried up. And I went absolutely broke. And I was actually in Bali. And Bali's really fun when you got a little bit of money. Bali is really hard when you are absolutely at zero. I was living in some back of some Bali temple for a month. And the pandemic came online. And it was either stay here or move back to the projects. And so I had to make the decision to move back to the projects. I reached out to a couple friends who I'd helped when I was at my top. They ghosted me. Had one guy, one of my old clients, he bought a plane ticket. I ended up back home in the projects with $14 to my name. I remember I got home, it was my mom. This is 2 years before she passed, so it was actually a gift from God because I got to spend some moments with my mom before she officially left. Back in the trailer, it's stinky, it's triggering, all my traumas are being reactivated. It was one of my biggest fears to ever go back to poverty, ever. I was like, I never want to go back to poverty. But then how do you know how strong your tools are, right? If I hadn't had that opportunity to go back, are my tools really that strong? It's easy for my tools to be strong when I'm sitting in a villa drinking jamu. It's a different thing when I'm back in Vegas. And so $14 in my name. I remember I said something to my mom, like, I don't know if I could keep going on. And she like laughed and she said, you've always been grumpy since you were a kid. Get some sleep. So I went to sleep, and at 3 a.m, I woke up and I said, you know what, I need to meditate. And so I'm meditating in the back of the trailer, and similar to the voice that came to me when I was at the bus stop, all of a sudden the voice came back and it was like laughing at me. And it said, oh, you think like the master teachings are in some ashram in Bali or in some temple in Thailand. Trailer parks can be temples too if you know how to tune in. And the download that came to me is that the greatest way to show God in the universe at that moment that I understood all the lessons that I was given was to ask not what I can be given when I'm absolutely broke, but how can I serve? And so the next day I woke up, I created a 30-day challenge, brought all my master friends around, and next thing you know, like 3,000 people plus signed up to it. And that was a trajectory builder. All of a sudden from there, over the course of 2 years, it's been nothing but upward trajectory. God in the universe had to bring me to zero. It had to rid me of everything that was once me to step into everything that is the most aligned me. And that's really been the journey the last 3 to 4 years, is like, if it's not on God, from God, and for God, I'm not with it. From love, again and again, asking myself, how can I serve? Metaphysical law. When you ask the universe, how can I serve? You're showing the universe, the God, whatever you want to call it, I'm abundant. And when you're aligning and matching that frequency, abundance naturally flows in. Metaphysical law that I learned from the projects. And so it's really been this incredible journey over the last 3 or 4 years of that. And a lot of heartbreak in the space. My mom passed away a couple years after that. My dad passed away 5 months ago. And it, again and again and again, has brought me back into this space of like, thank you. Thank you for the lessons. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the gifts. And now, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to squander my time? Or am I going to continue to make every moment as meaningful as possible? And so I don't know how long I got here, but I know that as long as I am here, I'm going to give everything I got to this life, because I have now the data, the anecdotal and the empirical data to shows that through service, through love, through compassion, through convictions, through truth, through gratitude, you can channel your energy in a way that is going to create a reality that is of your highest alignment.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and while I do that, I just want to give everyone a few minutes heads up on Q&A. So we'll have a mic passed around, and again, as Branden has said, he's an open book, and it's all access. So this is time to ask all the things that you would want to know, and nothing is off limits. So we'll have a mic be passed around shortly. There are so many keywords and buzzwords that come to mind, and even in our conversations, I feel like we start somewhere and we go off on a different tangent, and there's just so many dialogues to be had and many more conversations. But the thing that just struck me right now is, as you just mentioned, the last couple years where you hit literal rock bottom, and understanding that there are reasons for why that happened, and that's probably a conversation for another talk, to understand how someone can build themselves up and then allow themselves to be depleted. But I actually care more right now about the forgiveness part of it, because there is challenges that we face on a daily basis, and because you talked about how it's like a daily consistent grind for you, and you have trust, you have gratitude, you have focus, and that is part of your consistency. But what do you do, and it can be big or small, to forgive yourself and to still tap into that potential that is there, that, as we said, there's self-love, there's self-worth, but it's hard to see when you only have $14 in your bank account.
It's very hard, but it's there. And, the greatest lesson that came online on this 39-year journey, I'm about to be 40 in about 6 months, is self-love and self-worth is key. And when that is there and that is intact, everything else emanates from that space. And it's hard in a world that tells us that we're not enough. It's hard for a world that tells us we need to be better. It's hard in a world that tells us we need to be pursuing certain things and having certain goals and doing certain things to feel like we are enough. But the truth is, the very fact that we are alive is enough. The very fact that we became life is enough. And when self-love becomes the activating force that you stand on, everything else changes. And 3 questions I like to ask are, can I celebrate the parts of me nobody celebrates? Can I love the parts of me that I deem most unlovable? And can I love myself like there's nothing to fix? When you ask yourself those questions, the answers to those questions are doorways to a deeper level of self-love. The truth is that self-love and self-hate can't live at the same time in a person. You're either in self-love or you're in self-hate. And I can tell you, when you begin to build from a space of, I am enough, I might be a work in progress, but I'm enough, the trajectory that you move towards changes as well. And on the other side of that, if you are building from a space of, I am not good enough, I don't love myself, I am in self-hate, the trajectory that you go on changes as well. You pursue things that are fulfilling to that. I need to fix myself. I need to change myself. It's a very small line, but the most important relationship that we can cultivate is with ourselves. And I can tell you this just from a lot of data that I've had in my own experience. It does not matter how much success one achieves. It does not matter how many millions you have in the bank. It doesn't matter how many accolades you get. If you do not love yourself, it will never, ever be enough. But you go to the jungles of Peru and you see people with no money whatsoever, and they're in their love, they're in their gratitude, they're in their grace. What is it there? There's something there. And so once I locked in to this idea of self-love is the way, all the other psychosomatic issues that I had, abandonment wounds, savior complexes, codependency, and the list goes on from growing up in the project, these all began to naturally harmonize and heal because I was standing in my self-love. And self-love changes the trajectory. When we wake up and we say, how can I love myself better? Changes the game. How can I nourish myself deeper? How, when I'm feeling at my absolute worst right now in this moment, can I just actually love on myself a little bit more? Those little micro shifts, as we spoke about earlier, they become game changers in the long run. And then from there, you're standing in authenticity. And when you're standing in authenticity, it's sustainable. It's easy because you are you. You own it all. Shadows and gifts alike. All of it becomes this beautiful tapestry of who we are. And then that allows us to resonate with the right people, and it becomes the ultimate filter to push anybody who's not in alignment with you out of your way. And so I think the most important thing really is like knowing that you are a gift, knowing that you are incredible, knowing that you are sacred, standing in that. Yes, you might have a lover. Yes, you might have something you love, but the most important relationship you can ever cultivate is the one with yourself. Because when that is locked in and you are, in a sense, courting yourself on a daily basis, loving on yourself when you become your beloved, then every day is a dance in heaven. And when you're not in that space and self-hate is the set point, then every day can become hell. And one of my master teachers told me that a credible quote, he said, heaven is not a place you go to, it's a place you grow to. And it's found in every moment rooted in love. And so I think that answered your question.
It does. I actually have a follow-up, but I'm going to save that. I want to give an opportunity for the audience to ask some questions. So if we have a mic that passed around, and see a hand raised there, and Rob has one. All right.
Boom. Yeah, so firstly, wow. My brother. That's so many parallels in your story. And Ubuntu, there's a very close friend of Bhavna and mine, a guy called Richard Harrington, who people here might remember. beautiful guy, man, from South Africa. And he was the first guy who shared that with me. Ubuntu, I am because you are, you know? And just about every civilization has a different root to that. But we're using different words, but it comes from the same place. But anyway, so many things. But first, I just want to say thank you for sharing so many different analogies for life, right? Which personally I feel to be, you know, the white belt, right? How can I serve? All these things which I believe I do is kind of checking me out, right? It's kind of checking me, saying, hey, here's a mirror, have a look, you know, which I think is very important. So, one question divided into three. Right.
Kindred spirits.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it starts like this. So many people we've had on the show and many people that I've spoken to in Bali as well, you know, are at a place where they need to make a living. Okay? So how do you do the what can I give or how can I be of service? In the background too, I got to pay rent. That's one part of it. And I'll keep them aligned. The second part is then in relation to that burn, where was that for you in relation to the first of, I know that I need to be of service, but I've got to pay the rent. There's a burn point. And the third related question is those with kids, right? How would you share that with them so they can inspire their kids with this? Because that's where I think, where I feel very strongly that the gold is there, man, as well, to get this into the minds of kids, the next generation. So that one question divided into three, right, is, the first part is, so how do you do that of how can I be of service, but I got rent to pay? Mm. The second one is an extension of that, and then the third one is how would you go about teaching kids this stuff?
I might have you repeat the second. The first quote I love, simple mathematics. Service to others plus your talent equals your purpose. Service to others plus your talent equals your purpose. And when you lean into your talent and you are in service to others, you inevitably put in the time to become better and better at your talent. And since it is inevitably energy, what you give out inevitably comes right back. And so the energetic exchange, and by the way, money to me is like number 10 on the wealth scale, but it is important. But I can tell you that when you are rooted in your talent and you're rooted in service to others, the money will always figure itself out.
The second part of that was the burn. So knowing that, you know, from a mental aspect, because again, reading 10, 100, 1,000 books, you get it in here, right? So as you said, putting the feet into action. So what was the burn point for you in that situation, and how did you get through that burn point?
That particular situation when I was at 0.00, and it's funny because like one of my close dear friends hit me up and he's like, yo, B, I was at 0.2, man. I had to reach out to my mom and she had to like invest in me for the course of the year. I was like, well, you really weren't at 0. Like, I was all the way at 0. Like, there's no lifelines. I done maxed out. The burn point was trust. It was really the trust. It was in trusting that if I put in the effort, the energy, the conviction, the focus, the gratitude, and the consistency long enough, things would change. And what's powerful, again, when you're operating in Kairos, deep time, Jay-Z would say, difficult takes a day, impossible takes a week. Time changes, time shifts. All of a sudden, what maybe it took 10 years in the past takes a month, takes a couple months. there's no roadmap, and that's the beautiful thing about this game. But I can tell you is that as you become more sharp with your tools, things speed up. And so the most courageous thing to do is to lean in to those burn points, because it's inevitably in those resistance points where your tools become sharper. And it did take me 10 years from my first burn point to get to that 1 year where everything changed. So it's not like I'm a stranger to having to stay dedicated for a long time where it seemed like nothing was changing. But similar to like, I don't know, you know, in Bali we have a lot of people into the crypto space. Similar to the crypto space, day to day might not seem like anything's changing, but pull out long enough and everything changes. And so that's the key, is just consistently staying with it long enough, leaning into those burns, and knowing that if your heart is in the right place, everything else will take care of itself. And oftentimes, what is on the other side of the burn is beyond anything you could have ever imagined. You know, Joe Dispenza says something in the lines of, you can't create the unknown from the known. You got to go into unknown territory to create the unknown. And I don't know who, this is very misquoted, so I don't know who says exactly, but doing the same thing and expecting a different result is insanity. And so stepping into the burn is counterintuitive to the limbic system, our reptilian brain that wants safety, because it's uncomfortable. But the sooner we can learn to dance in the burn, dance in the rain, the sooner we begin to lock the gifts that allow us to move the clouds out of the way, turn the sunshine on, or make the most of the rainstorms, and also mine for the gifts in there. And I'll end with this. In alchemy, the first stage of alchemy is called the Negredo. It's fascinating. And the Negredo is this deep, dark beneath the soil where all the nutrients are potentialized. In our culture, a lot of people don't want to go deep into the shadow world. But if we think about the greatest gifts that we have as humans, they're often created in the dark. Babies are born in the dark. Things are created in the dark. Our imagination is created in the dark. And so the burn also is symbolic to going into the first stage of alchemy and sitting in it long enough for the imaginal cells of the caterpillar, that butterfly, to inevitably come to life.
Beautiful. And the third part, by the way, don't do this to anybody else. Terrible way to do it. That's a great way, great way. Third part is kids, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to children coming up,
Yeah.
How would you infuse this into their system?
Well, so as a uncle to 7 nephews and nieces, love them all. Kids are always watching, and they imitate. They imitate who we are, what we are. And there's a quote that really was beautiful that I stumbled upon recently, and it spoke about, a lot of people say they would die for their kids, but your kids don't need you to die for them. They need you to live for them. And it's in living for our children that we establish an example of what it means to be a person that goes for their goals, goes for their vision, stands in their purpose. And I think that a lot of times it is easier to say, like, you know what? I got kids, so I got to put my stuff on hold. But the truth is, at this day and age, 2024, where everything in the world is possible, everything in the world is online, where all the barriers have been broken down, where all the stigmas and stereotypes are navigatable, even with children, and you see it, that's one of the things I love about Bali, even with children, you can make moves. And sometimes it might require 10 years of focus. For a parent, for example, I remember sitting back with my mom, man, and my mom was always like, I want a husband, I want to school. And it was the same conversation for like 7, 8 years, and she died. And none of that happened. But she would watch Price is Right. She would sit back and watch the evening news. Those hours compound. Those hours could have been something that was towards something different for her. And so even with children, I think children sometimes are used as a crutch. I think children actually can be used as a catalyzer of potential. I'm living for my children. I'm going for it. I'm giving my everything so I can show them what it looks like to go after my dharma, go after my truth, go after my highest expression of life.
Hi, Branden. First of all, thank you so much for your honesty and for the depth in which you're going in your sharing. Very rarely do I have the chance to hear someone speak here and really show its true color and be really, really raw about everything that he has experienced in his life, in or her life. So you also, and I have to commend you on your ability to storytell, because I'm a storyteller, so I can recognize that, and the way that you unpack the complicated and the emotional and create a message that is very simple is very, very impactful. So that's, I see you in that. And I also loved a few of the things that you say. The praying with your legs, that's priceless, yes. And your story of losing everything during COVID or before COVID, and then having to go back to your parents and to your mother and reinventing yourself. I had exactly the same happen to me. So I really connected with that. So tonight has been phenomenal. I've never taken so many notes. So bravo. And I'm French, so I'm very, very hard to please, I have to say. So one thing that you spoke of was support. You're in service of others, but you also have received the support of other people in return. And you spoke of support in the context of work. Now, I'd like to speak of support in the context of your personal life. I meet a lot of very entrepreneurial, very driven, very ambitious young men who want to change the world and, have a mission. But they seem to obliterate the position or the openness to having a loving partner or to having love in their life, because they think that it conflicts with their dream, and it's a time management thing. Yes, and I love what you said about the two perception of times. So I'm interested to find out what it is that you gained from having a world-class wife or partner, and whether having someone like that in your life has really propelled you to a higher level of creation.
That's the question. Yeah. Great. So the question is like romantically or? Okay. So I actually have just met a beautiful woman, and we've been diving deep, and I can say that it took 20 years for me to cut out all of my little boy tendencies to be able to attract a woman of her caliber. And I feel that oftentimes in our society, and I've seen it with my own eyes, working with a lot of very successful men, they do put love and other things on the back burner for success, but inevitably, when it's all said and done, the importance of having community and having family around is actually the highest form of wealth. And when we take it back to more indigenous senses of life, I had the opportunity actually in 2019 to spend time with the Maasai warriors in Kenya, to see the communal bonds, but to see that the importance of family is everything was one of the game changers for me. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter how big your house is. If the house is empty, it's just a house, it's not a home. And so I truly believe that one of the most important things of being a well-rounded entrepreneur is to make sure that all of those boxes are checked. And it is a process. And you know what? Sometimes some are suffering, others are flourishing. But at the same time, like, just even having that in one's awareness, and also having, so what's one of the greatest gifts that I've been given as of late, the last 2 years, is I have a men's group. And all of the men are good men, and they're all high achievers, but they're also deeply committed to their partners, deeply committed to their loves, deeply committed to their relationships, and very, very quick to check any men who are not in that space or they're starting to deviate out of alignment. So again, when we speak of a world-class team, I believe that there's many layers like an onion to that. And I do believe personally that having a rock star partner, obviously in Bali, people have many ideas of what partnership is, but having a rock star partner for me is core and key. But at the same time, like, it's so funny. I got like so many young men I talk to, and they want what they are not. A lot of people want to call in something that is like, I want a person that's aligned in this and that and this and that, but they're not that. How are you going to hold the space for a woman who has done the work if you haven't done the work? And so also a part of the journey for me is I had to like, there's that Bible verse that says, when I was a boy, I behaved as a boy, I acted as a boy, but when I became a man, I gave away childish things. I had to check myself in the confines of many, many hardcore check situations for me to be able to call in the woman that I'm dating now, which is, I believe, going to be a pillar for my next level. Does that answer it?
All right, 6-part question. Part 1.
The comedic timing. Chris Walker in the house.
You mentioned at a certain point a forgiveness journey. And so when you had that thing go down with your gyms and those people, I guess technically it was a 2-part. Did you forgive them? How long did it take and how'd you do it?
I love that you brought that up. You brought that up a couple times. So my gyms, and this is just a little backstory, my gyms, it grew from me and my business partner to 5 gyms. And we had about 50 employees. And when we first started them, we didn't have any money. And our credit was horrible. And in America, credit is everything. So we went on Facebook and we had everybody donate equipment. And we took over an old tortilla shed in the back of a Mexican restaurant. And we brought the love. Quote, I love. Build it and they will come. Love it and it will grow. At heartbeat. You can't buy that. And so we grew, but we didn't have the money to bring on a manager or operations COO. And so we gave them shares of our gym. So at that time, I was in grad school. So basically our percentage of the gym was of how much we could pay in rent. And so I could only afford like 34% of the rent. So I got 34% of the gym. My business partner got 51, and we gave 2%, 10% away, 5% to these other individuals. So all of a sudden, 4 years passed. We win Business of the Year in 2015 out of 65,000 gyms worldwide via Mind Body. It's cracking. I start to take off. I start to travel more. I'm not there as much. I inevitably end up like, I'm going to step down. The programs are tight. You guys just go ahead and run this. I'm, going to collect residuals and live my life. So crazy thing, I started coming back to the gyms from my travels, I'd come back every few months, and the culture started changing. Culture was just not the heartbeat. It was like weird. I was like, where's the love? Like this was supposed to be built off of love. And I finally had a conversation with my COO. I brought him in the office. I said, yo, Mark, like, this is not what we built this space off of. This is one of the guys we gave 5% to. He said, well, you're gallivanting around the world. You have nothing to say to me about running a business. He said, in fact, you better check yourself because I can shut this thing down. And I lost my shit. Excuse my language. But I didn't touch him, but there was a couch in the room, and I've never seen a couch suspend in the air for a couple seconds. And he went out and called the police on me. And as he's talking to the police, he said, 5'8", black man, being aggressive. The police came to my gym, and they walked in, and they said, did he touch you? And I said, and he said, no. He said, well, then why are you calling the gym? Does he have to leave? Because they were trying to kick me out of my own gym. And they were like, he's one of the owners. He's good. Long story short, that was what they used to justify, and there was a loophole in our contract, them coming together with the 51% and the 10% and kicking me out of my own gym. And so it went from me collecting residuals, I ended up having my bank account getting frozen and sued for $650,000. And so to add to all that, I got slandered in an entire community for a gym that I started out of the genuineness of my own heart. And I'm so grateful for it. Because, again, I was a big fish in a small pond. And what I had for me was not what God had for me. And so when Chris asked that forgiveness process, I had to really go deep into my forgiveness process for that. And I'm still healing that, actually, because that was, I never think of it. I never judge people's actions on what happened with the action. I judge people's action on what could have happened. And if we would have taken it 80 years ago, and these guys would have slandered me that way because they were not the same color skin as me. And this is why I say when he referred to me as a black man in his gym, that's big. 80 years ago, it could have meant me being lynched or something like that. And so the actions that they took against me were crazy. It's the only word I got for it. But what that did is it put me in a space where I had to dive into the burn completely because I had no other choice. I had a whole community be like, you know what? Nah, man. Branden is a loose cannon. I'm not a loose cannon. But if I'm triggered and disrespected, I have human emotions. It put me in a space where I had to really reinvent myself and again, find out who I was. Not Branden the trainer, not Branden the Vegas coach, not Branden the Nike guy. It was just me and me. What's interesting, love always wins. Maybe not in the moment, but love always wins. 5 years, 6 years later, you'd be surprised how many people reach out. Hey, B, yo. And these are people that played me. Hey, you want to three things you can't hide: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And so the forgiveness has been a work in progress, and I might not ever get all the way there. It hurt a lot, to be honest with you, but I see the blessings in it. And again, what is life without really knowing who you want your people to be? I now know that those are not the type of people I want to deal with. I want people that are writers, that are down, that live with love, that aren't going to switch up for money, that are going to fight for truth and fight for me, not when I'm at my highest, because it's easy. It's easy for people to love us when we're our highest. You really want to know when people love you? When you're down at your lowest. And you also want people around you that are going to celebrate your wins, not become offended by you shining. People who want to see you fly. And so it's been a journey.
I appreciate that. And as you talked a lot about spirituality and sometimes the spiritual bypassing thing, it's like, I forgive you. But what's the real journey to actually forgive? So I appreciate you sharing all that you shared, and then even have a thing that's saying, hey, we're still working on it. Thank you, man. Appreciate you, brother.
Okay. I think we have...
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those pieces of your life. And yeah, I've been following your career for a couple of years now, and find always very inspirational the philosophy, the poetry, the life guidance that they show with both men and women. It's always so on point, and it comes from a very rooted background, from a very developed mind, a very developed heart, and a very developed spirituality as well. And I would like to ask you, what would you recommend to the men in the world, and specifically to the men who call themselves part of a conscious community, part of people who are into relationship coaching advice community, the coaching advice industry, the male coach advice industry, and all this fucking poster coach industry around the world? What will you share with both men and women that are hiding themselves behind a persona that is not walking their talk in the real world. Because I come across with men who say they're relationship coaches, but then they don't show that in their real life. They don't show that level of honorability, kindness, respect with their own partners or in their own community. And I see that pattern of narcissism repeat itself over and over again because nobody calls it out. And I think the way to call out that would come from a place of love and compassion and a place of wanting to lift up those people and wanting to lift up men who are cheating, abusing, mistreating women in the world. What will you tell to those men that are utilizing women and then not being kind or protective or grateful enough to the women, to the children, and to the community? And I feel there's a lot of hiding. Like there's a lot of men hiding and not enough men showing up for their communities. And right now we're in a position that we need more masculinity in our communities. And such as yourself, I feel like you're one of the most influential masculine male leaders in the community, in the conscious community. And what would you tell to those men to replicate that honorability, kindness, and compassion?
Thank you for the question. So I am also a work in progress, first and foremost. And what we see in the masculine is more of a inside look into how men are raised overall. Because in our society, men haven't really been taught how to be men. There's a concept called suspended adolescence. There's also a concept called normative male alexithymia, men's inability to connect with their emotional state because of being bombarded with G.I. Joe syndrome, essentially. This thing called compulsory heterosexuality. And a lot of times, instead of learning to be an integrated, whole, emotionally expressed human, men are told to be the Terminator. And what that inevitably does is it shuts us off from inevitably becoming whole humans. And that process there disconnects us and distorts our relationship with the feminine. There's not a right way, inevitably, to go about that. I mean, it's deep, it's systemic, it's ancient. But I can say at the same time, just as it is easy to point out that there is not a lot of men doing the work, there's also a lot of men doing the work. And I'm really proud of my brothers for showing up, because it is not easy. Now, in that space, the question is okay, do you just give a pass for bad behavior? Because some behavior is absolutely destructive. And this is why it's so important in these communities to stand in integrity, stand in values, and stand for something, and call out when somebody is not leading from the heart and standing in their values. Opening up that throat chakra, really saying that is not cool. And the truth is, there is a lot of these communities around the game, around the world, where people in general are using spiritual technology, spiritual verbology to manipulate. And inevitably, people are getting hurt. And so the most important thing, first and foremost, is, and this is as a brother to 4 little sisters, by the way, I've dealt with a lot of dudes, is as women, really, really standing in your sovereignty and your power, and knowing what you are and knowing who you are, and speaking up. A lot of women that I know have trouble speaking and expressing. A lot of times because of not feeling safe, the throat chakra shuts down. So it's important, though, that you create a safe environment inwardly first, inevitably, so that your expression and truth is outward. And at the same time, as men, we can do better. And it is a process. And although it is not perfect, it is changing quickly. I think one of the most important things for men is to be around good men. One of the most important things for men is to heal and be able to bring their wounds, their shame, their guilt to the altar of brotherhood, not where they're judged, but where they can say, yo, I don't have it figured out. I need help. You would be surprised at how many men's group I've sat into, and the strongest guy there absolutely breaks down into tears because he doesn't even know why he's addicted to porn. But then you find out at 5 years old, it was a coping mechanism or something like that. But because men have been told to shut off so much, we're not able to express that in a lot of ways. And so as women too, we need our women to hold those spaces for us to also explore those parts of ourselves, not in shame and guilt and judgment, but in like, yo, I got you. I know you're wounded. Let's heal this. This is all a macro example of a systemic issue. Krishnamurti said that, Krishnamurti, this is a good one, but I might have lost it. It's no mark. No, yeah, it's all good. But anyways, Krishnamurti essentially said that, like, here it goes. It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a mentally sick society. A lot of people are well adjusted to a mentally sick society, and it's the system overall that has created dysfunction. And the only way we can heal is together. Men need men, women need women. We all need each other. And so there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of answers to that. But I can say, like, first and foremost, as a man, I'm sorry for any man that has not showed up in the way that you have. And also, as a brother to many of these men, I'm holding my brothers to a higher level, and I'm also doing the work on myself to show up better every day. And I oftentimes fall short, but I'm doing my absolute best, and I am seeing the pendulum change just because of awareness. Whereas 20, 30 years ago, it was just like, there was not a lot of awareness, but I believe it's shifting. So.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and there's a lot of hope in that reply, and I hope it gets replicated and more men continue to grow and expand their love.
All right. Okay.
I have two questions. One question I have, I was curious about the time you went broke and went back to Vegas. Is that because of the problem with the gyms, or was it something else? And let me get the second question out, because it's a very short one. What is the difference in your mind between narcissism and self-love?
Great question. So it was definitely a byproduct of the gyms, because when I walked away, I was collecting residuals. My gyms were running. And so in the process of that happening, I had to go on full faith mode. And full faith mode, God mode, was activated. And for a couple years, it worked until it didn't. And inevitably, the bank account started just slipping a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more until I zeroed out. And inevitably, in that moment, you could say it was like negligence. You could say I should have been more aware, should have been more financially responsible one day. I was trusting God, but hindsight's 2020, and it was exactly what was supposed to happen. So it was a beautiful alchemy that led to that moment. But for some reason, because of my past decisions, when I got to that moment, there was no get out of jail free card. It was zero. Okay. So narcissism versus self-love. Great question. Somebody once told me, said, cockiness says that I am better than you, and confidence is nobody's better than me. Or confidence is, I'm no better than you, but nobody's better than me. And so narcissism, it's a loaded word. It's oftentimes thrown around in a weaponized way. But narcissism at its core really is an emanation of fear and an emanation of not being enough. And inevitably, because you don't feel enough, you assert yourself in a way that is to dominate rather than to co-create or collaborate. Self-love says, I am enough. And from a space of self-love, what inevitably appears from that is a co-creation that is much more harmonious. It's much more of an even playing field. Narcissism, I see it a lot in the spiritual community. A lot of times, these coaches were wounded individuals who may have been picked on or something like that. They pick up a few trainings, and then all of a sudden they're in Ubuntu, and they are they're running around fulfilling all of these unresolved traumas that never got addressed when they were younger, and it just looks like yoga. At the same time, self-love, when it's really rooted, it says that I am enough how I am, and the end goal is not to. The end goal is mutuality rather than superiority, co-creation rather than hierarchy, and it's a very thin line. And I think that it is something that we have to be mindful of. Not saying that when you're in self-love, you never bounce back and forth to narcissism. There's a very thin line between superheroes and supervillains. Superheroes use their powers for others. Supervillains use their powers for themselves. And an awareness, if one is aware, they step on the side of superhero more than supervillain. We all have that insidious part of ourselves that is the lower self, I would say, or I wouldn't even say it's a lower self, it's just the human self. But we do know that there are higher values and aspirations that inevitably bring us back to the heart. Every school of thought, every great teaching continues again and again to bring us to love. And self-love inevitably is an extension of that. And when that's rooted and it's healthy, not pathological, I believe it's a game changer. Because inevitably, I can never sit back and say, I see you, bro. I see your heart if I don't see myself. And I think that's the other lens to narcissism, is narcissism they don't see themselves. So inevitably, they don't see you. So inevitably, what they see is a projection, or they try to contort the person to inevitably be what they are seeing from a distorted lens. So that's my opinion.
All right, and our last question.
Thank you so much. Would love to hear what you're co-creating with Nike right now, and what's exciting you the most about that work.
So, really exciting. Actually, 3 days ago, I got the phone call, and Nike is finally getting into mental health, and it's taken 10 years and a lot of red tape. Even when I brought yoga to Nike in 2016, it was considered very taboo. And 2020, we tried to talk about mental health, and there was too much red tape. But I feel like the pandemic really brought to light the importance of mental health and how important it is to touch on something that we can't see, but inevitably runs the background of many people's lives. And so at Nike, it's such a big corporation that when things move, it takes a long time to move. But when it finally starts to move, it moves in a really powerful way. And because they have the ability through their marketing to make mental health appealing to people who might not be on the spiritual path as deep, it's really exciting. And so right now, Nike is creating the blueprint for a mental health movement throughout the entire company, inevitably to the consumers. And I gotta believe that, obviously a lot of people have opinions, as I mentioned earlier, about Nike, but power versus force. One person operating out of love consciousness is enough to up-level 1 million people out of the lower rungs. When a company like that starts to embody something like, okay, we're going to get behind mental health, we're going to get behind helping people have the resources, I can only believe that the ripple is going to be massive. And obviously, they continue to work with individuals like me, so it shows that some people are really, really focused on doing their best when it comes to walking into those spaces.
Okay. So we will have an opportunity after we wrap and the cameras stop rolling to have some one-on-one chats with Branden. So I just want to be cognizant of everyone's time and these incredible questions. Let's say we could probably have multiple episodes. I think we're just laying the groundwork for future episodes. We could dive into all the things we talked about much deeper. I think it's really beautiful that we've had a chance to kind of cover the spectrum. And for people here who weren't before exposed to you, I think definitely have such an appreciation and value for who you are and how you show up and how you speak so vulnerably. So with that, I have one last thing I want to ask. I have many things I want to ask, but we're just going to go with one. And then we'll start to wrap up. So this is actually a cause close to my heart. We talked about it briefly. So permission to get a little dark, but I think also hopeful. Is for those of you who may not know, SpeakuP Monday was born from suicide. So our founder here, Robert Bonnick, had people in his network who seemingly came from walks of life and lifestyles that you wouldn't anticipate they would take their own life. And with that, it created a ripple effect of him wanting to create community. So people can come together, talk, inspire, change. And I think I've said this to many people before, and those who know me, that I believe that there is more power and value in dialogue than a single perspective. And so with that, just to kind of lay the groundwork for my question is, I was recently in India. I just came back, and there are many people from India, relatives and friends of friends, who I mentioned that this show happens and what it's about and the principles of it. And so they're tuning in, many of whom are students who are, entering college, graduating. And we talked a lot here about potential and, as you said, trust, gratitude, focus. And we also talked a lot about what that means in terms of recognizing your self-love and self-worth. If, for those who are tuning in, there was an article that came out recently that really affected me. As you know, India is a country of 1 billion people, and there are many students who are going through a city in India called Kota, which is a coaching institute city. So students go there, parents work really hard to pay tuition so that these students can get training to then be competitive to enter into med school, engineering school, so just to give foundation. What this city has also become known for is suicide city, with, I think it was 26 students in the last 6 months who felt they just weren't enough, that their parents, many of whom come from villages, had spent money to put them through school to hope that this is their chance at stability. And it's heartbreaking because you have these students who are writing letters that just literally say, "Sorry, mom and dad, I just couldn't do it." And with that becomes such a ripple effect and generational trauma that we can just predict. And so for any of those students, some of whom, as I said, is close to my heart, are relatives and friends of friends, and I know this is going to be shared with them. When you talk about self-love and self-worth, and when we talk about what does that look like for those at that tipping point when they have support, they believe, with family who is doing everything they can to get them into these competitive situations, yet their self-worth, they believe, is based on performance. And performance in the light of their parents. And if they're at that tipping point, about to write that note, and there is something that they might feel might just be hope, as you recently talked about in one of your posts about breaking through, moving to the other side of things, there's so much beauty in that. But in that moment when it feels messy and scary and you don't feel you have that option, is there something for anyone who's tuning in online that you would want to impart? Sorry for the long preamble, but I think the context was important.
Going back again to self-love is important, but I would first say that anybody who is in that position, and I have dealt with that as well, it's really important to ask for help and to speak to somebody because suicide's permanent. And it's one of those things that when the emotion and the energy subsides, oftentimes, a lot of times, individuals are like, yeah, like I just had to get through that wave. And so the first thing is like knowing that speaking to somebody is a expression of strength. Really important to like know that vulnerability is strength. Saying I don't have it figured out is strength. Saying I need help is strength. The second thing is like, one of the things that I've learned on my journey is like, no matter how bad it's gotten, and I have also struggled with suicidal thoughts most of my life, a lot of it probably trauma related, is that there's always sunshine after the rain. And oftentimes, the sunshine and the rainbows are beyond anything you could have ever imagined. But one has to weather the storm. And that can be really hard in those spaces, especially when you're put in a silo of performative, quantitative numbers, having to be something. And this is why it's so important to remember this aspect of self-love, that when you strip away the titles, when you strip away the accolades, when you strip away the degrees, when you strip away the numbers and everything, the very fact that you are you, that there never has been and never will be again another you, that you are that sacred, that right there, knowing that and really believing that is all the reason you need to keep going. And for those who are on those ledges, my word is just to take a moment, breathe, bring some of the people around you that you love the most, let them know what you're going through. You don't have to do it alone. And we all need help. And so know that the world is a better place because you are here, and the storm's always past. And sometimes it takes strength to lean into the storm and to make your way through it. But, you know, there's so much beauty on the other side of it. And I would hope that anybody who's at that point of wanting to take their life sits down and remembers exactly what I just said. Because especially at a young age, like, emotions are everywhere, and we know that brains at that juncture are not able to really self-regulate like our more mature adult brains. Breathe, pause, ask for help.
Thank you for that. And just to kind of close the loop on that last piece is, you know, many of the people I'm speaking of, you know, they know you by name, they know you by a profile. They're like, oh, that's that fitness guy, that Nike guy. And so I think there is such power. I'm not sitting here thinking that we're solving the systemic issue of mental health stigma in India. Like, I'm not going to, you know, be so naive. But what I'm hoping we're doing, as we said, even if there's one person on the other side of this,
Of course.
that is listening and recognizing, okay, if other students were doing it, there's a community of us who are feeling lost and feeling like we don't have that community. So let's start talking together. There's power in that, which is also what SpeakuP is all about, is community. And through that, there is platforms like this and people like yourself who've been there and who got to the other side.
Absolutely.
So thank you for just allowing for that. And I'm just going to wrap up here. And while I do, just think of any sort of parting words before we wrap up. So I just want to take a moment, some final thank yous. First and foremost, thank you to our audience. There is such magic in connection and humanity and people and the questions that we ask. And it makes it so much more engaging, but so much more significant. And I know that taking time out of your day, whether it's online or here in person, is something that is a privilege that we got to have you be here. So thank you for just being here and sharing and hopefully spreading the words that we're trying to create here. So thank you for that, all the audience and all the questions. And thank you, as always, our incredible team at Tropical Nomad. This would not be possible, and we are in such privilege to be able to sit here, have these conversations every single Monday amongst the beauty and the warmth that is just emanates from the team. So thank you so much for allowing for that. And of course, our leader, Robert Ian Bonnick, Brother Rob, he has created this platform as a community give 4 years, rain or shine, every Monday, episode 413. That is remarkable. So thank you so much, brother, for just allowing for this and allowing for people like myself to have the honor of sharing space and talking. So thank you. And with that, I want to, yes.
I also would love to commend you
Oh.
on the quality of your questioning today, because we would not have been able to have the depth of the experience that we got as an audience without you.
Thank you. Well, I will say that I believe I'm very rich in relationships, and every person that has been up here with me has been the result of a connection that was nurtured and nourished, that led me to the next connection and led me to here. So I'm, me enough to know that curiosity, compassion, connection, those are the things that get me all alive and juiced up. So I'm only as good as the people who allow me to be in their life. So thank you. Thank you. How do I say thank you to you? You have left us with way more that we want to hear. You have been raw, vulnerable. I had kind of a general idea of what I want to talk about. That completely went out the window. I don't even know why I'm still holding this phone. It really served no purpose. But so Rob's always trying to get me to do. But I will say that it has been such an honor, and I know this is just the beginning of more dialogue and more conversations. You have left us with gems, and I think of gems as rough, raw stones that get polished away to be something shining and bright and beautiful. And you've had so many of those gems in your life that you shared with us. You have given us codes, beliefs, takeaways, but more than that, you've just given us access to your heart and your mind and the way you think, and allowing us to know that it is a journey and you're right there with us, and allowing us to humanize the person behind all the talks and all the posts. So thank you so much. I know you just got off a plane, literally I think yesterday, from Thailand, and you're here. So thank you so much, Branden, for just being here. Thank you, thank you.
It is such an honor.
And with that, final words.
Well, thank you for the beautiful dialogue. Thank you for the platform. Thank you for each and every one of you bringing your energy, bringing your heart into this space. A quote that came to me in the Amazon jungle. Whenever I find myself hating another person, I remember that my ego has hijacked my heart, and I return to love. Whenever I find myself judging another person, I remember that my ego has hijacked my heart, and I return to love. Whenever I find myself canceling another person, I remember that my ego has hijacked my heart, and I return to love. Whenever I find myself hating myself, I remember that my ego has hijacked my heart, and I return to love. Whenever I find myself judging myself, I remember that my ego has hijacked my heart, and I return to love. Whenever I find myself canceling myself, I remember that my ego has hijacked my heart, and I return to love. Anahata Chakra, the great connector of the lower and the higher. Love is the access point. All the greats knew that, and that's what we are. Get caught up in all that you are. Remember that there is only one you, never has been, never will be again another you. Fall in love with all parts of you, shadows included. Those are the most juicy parts of ourselves. Share, shine, love, create, serve, and play. Everything else takes care of itself. It was an honor. I appreciate you all. I'm grateful for you all. Health in the body, peace in the spirit, love in the heart. One love.
Amazing. Thank you.